Imagine a time, not so long ago in the grand cosmic calendar, when Europe was tearing itself apart. This was the early 17th century. The continent was a chaotic patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, and principalities, all caught in a devastating storm of conflict. The 30 Years' War, which began in 1618, was a brutal, seemingly endless struggle. It started over religion, a fight between Catholic and Protestant rulers about who had the right to determine the faith of their people. But it quickly spiraled into something much bigger, a tangled web of political ambition, territorial disputes, and dynastic rivalries. The lines between faith and power became hopelessly blurred. For ordinary people, life was a nightmare. This wasn't a war fought by distant armies on remote battlefields. It swept through towns and villages, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Armies, often made up of mercenaries who fought for whoever paid them, lived off the land. They plundered homes, burned crops, and spread disease. Famine and plague became as deadly as the sword. Entire regions of Central Europe, particularly the German lands, were decimated. Some estimates suggest that the population in these areas dropped by a staggering amount, with millions perishing from violence, starvation, and sickness. It was a catastrophe on a scale that is hard for us to comprehend today. The very fabric of society was unraveling. Generations grew up knowing nothing but war. The constant uncertainty meant that no one could plan for the future. Farmers couldn't be sure they would harvest their crops, and merchants couldn't travel safely. The old order, where the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope held immense sway over political and spiritual life, was collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. The war showed that this old system was no longer capable of maintaining peace or stability. It was an engine of perpetual conflict, feeding on itself in a cycle of revenge and retaliation. This prolonged period of suffering created a profound sense of weariness across the continent. The initial religious fervor that had fueled the war had long since faded, replaced by a desperate longing for security and an end to the bloodshed. Rulers, too, saw their treasuries drained and their lands ruined. They began to realize that no single side could achieve a total victory. Continuing the fight would only lead to more widespread ruin, benefiting no one. This collective exhaustion, this deep continent-wide sigh, set the stage for one of the most significant turning points in the history of human governance. A new idea was needed. After 3 decades of unrelenting horror, the leaders of Europe finally decided that enough was enough. The war had exhausted everyone. The cost in human lives and treasure was astronomical, and the political goals that had seemed so important at the start were now lost in a fog of mutual destruction. It was time to talk. But how do you make peace when so many different groups are involved, each with their own complicated list of demands? The solution was a monumental diplomatic effort, something the world had never seen before. For several years, starting in 1644, delegates from across Europe gathered in 2 German cities, Münster and Osnabrück, in the region of Westphalia. This wasn't a single, simple meeting. It was a sprawling, complex series of negotiations that dragged on for years. Imagine hundreds of diplomats representing over 100 different warring parties, from great empires like Sweden and France to the tiniest German states. They had to navigate a labyrinth of political grievances, religious disputes, and territorial claims. The very act of getting them all to the table was a diplomatic miracle. They chose 2 separate cities to accommodate the religious divide. Catholic and Protestant delegations needed their own spaces to negotiate without officially recognizing each other at first. It was a slow, painstaking process of building trust where none existed. The primary motivation was sheer, unadulterated exhaustion. The leaders who sent these diplomats had seen their power and resources vanish into the black hole of war. They wanted stability above all else. They needed a way to stop the fighting and prevent a similar catastrophe from ever happening again. The goal was no longer to win a religious crusade or to dominate the continent. Instead, the objective shifted to creating a practical, workable system that could manage disputes peacefully. They were looking for a way to live with their differences, rather than die for them. This was a radical shift in thinking for the time. So, in 1648, after years of intense negotiation, they finally reached an agreement. The result was not one treaty, but a series of treaties collectively known as the Peace of Westphalia. It formally ended the 30 Years' War in the Holy Roman Empire and the 80 Years' War between Spain and the Dutch Republic. It was a document born from despair, a grand compromise designed to pull Europe back from the brink of total collapse. It didn't solve every problem, but it laid down a new set of rules for how states should interact, moving away from religious dogma and toward a more secular political order. The Peace of Westphalia introduced some truly revolutionary ideas, concepts that would ripple through time and shape our modern world. The most important of these was the principle of state sovereignty. Think of it like this. Before Westphalia, a king or prince might rule a territory, but their authority was often challenged by outside powers like the Pope or the Holy Roman Emperor. The treaties changed that. They established the idea that each state, no matter how large or small, had the right to govern its own territory and its own people without external interference. The ruler of the land became the ultimate authority within that land's borders. This concept of sovereignty had a huge impact on religion. A key principle of the peace was a Latin phrase meaning whose realm, his religion. This idea had existed before, but Westphalia solidified it and expanded it. It meant that individual rulers could determine the official religion of their state, whether it be Catholicism, Lutheranism, or now, Calvinism. While it didn't establish religious freedom for individuals in the way we think of it today, it did end the era of large-scale religious wars waged by outside powers. It privatized religion in a sense, making it a matter of internal state policy rather than a justification for international conflict. Another key outcome was the formal recognition of a system of independent, equal states. By signing the treaties, powers like France, Sweden, and the Dutch Republic were all recognized as sovereign entities, interacting with each other as equals on the world stage. This was the birth of international relations as we know it. It established the need for diplomacy, for ambassadors, and for international law to mediate disputes between states. The treaties created a new political map of Europe, adjusting borders and recognizing the independence of states like Switzerland and the Netherlands. The power of the Holy Roman Emperor was significantly weakened, turning the empire into a much looser collection of virtually independent states. In essence, the Peace of Westphalia provided a new blueprint for political order. It didn't create perfect harmony overnight. Wars would still happen, but it fundamentally changed the reasons for war and the rules of the game. Power was no longer seen as flowing down from a single religious or imperial authority. Instead, it was understood to reside within the borders of distinct territories, each governed by its own sovereign ruler. This framework, this new way of seeing the world as a collection of independent nation-states, was the most profound and lasting legacy of those years of negotiation in Munster and Osnabrück. The ripples from the Peace of Westphalia have traveled across the centuries, shaping the very structure of our global community. The idea of the modern nation-state, a defined territory with a sovereign government, became the standard political unit. Over the next few hundred years, this model spread from Europe across the entire planet. As empires rose and fell, and as colonies fought for their independence, the goal was almost always to establish a new nation-state based on Westphalian principles. The world map we see today, with its clearly drawn borders separating nearly 200 countries, is a direct descendant of the ideas formalized in 1648. Think about the United Nations. The very foundation of that organization rests on the Westphalian concept of state sovereignty and legal equality among its members. The UN Charter emphasizes the importance of non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries, a core tenet that comes directly from the peace treaties. When we talk about international law, diplomacy between nations, or the sanctity of borders, we are speaking a political language that has its roots in the settlement that ended the 30 Years' War. It created the operating system for modern global politics, a system that has proven remarkably durable. Of course, this system is not without its challenges. In our interconnected world of the 21st century, the lines of sovereignty are becoming increasingly blurry. Issues like climate change, global pandemics, international terrorism, and the flow of information on the internet do not respect national borders. Organizations like the European Union show a willingness of nations to voluntarily pool some of their sovereignty to achieve common goals. Debates rage about humanitarian intervention, When, if ever, is it right for the international community to step inside a nation's borders to prevent atrocities? These are all tests of the classic Westphalian model. Yet even with these modern complexities, the core principles of Westphalia remain incredibly relevant. The desire for national self-determination, the importance of territorial integrity, and the principle of non-interference continue to be powerful forces in world affairs. The Peace of Westphalia was more than just a treaty to end a war. It was a profound rethinking of how human societies should organize themselves on a global scale. Born from the ashes of a devastating conflict, it provided a framework for order that, for all its flaws, has structured our world for over 375 years. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes our greatest leaps forward come from our moments of deepest despair,